Today we're going to troubleshoot a Python script that isn't running. So if I double click this, it's flashing up a window that is immediately closing. Basically, it's not working. The reason why you don't see a lot of tutorials talking about this troubleshooting step and why a lot of people get frustrated as a consequence is because there's a lot to be aware of with modern operating systems and programming languages. It can get quite complicated keeping track of everything. But the reality is each individual step is pretty simple. It's just a matter of when it all combines, it gets kind of very complicated very quickly. So hopefully this in-depth overview of how to troubleshoot these issues might be useful to a few of you who are struggling with this. This is kind of the resource that I guess I wish I would have seen when I was first starting out with Python. So hopefully this is helpful. So the first thing I'm going to recommend that we do in order to see what's going on is open this up in VSCode. So the first way we're going to do this is we're just going to right click and say open with VSCode this time. So by opening this directly in VSCode, we can simply run it. So this is again messed up. We're going to pick Python 3.10, make sure that's our default version. And when I hit play, it's going to give us an error. And the reason we're doing this in VS Code is A, instead of just being a black box that disappears immediately, we can actually see what the error is. And B, we can look at our code at the same time. So this is a great way for troubleshooting Python scripts. So the first thing we'll notice is that there's a traceback error, which means Python is running. This is showing us exactly where the error came from, and it's inside of our Python file. It's our autoclicker py line 5. So this line right here, line 5, is showing us where the error is, and it says, all right, there's the code. Yep. Module not found error, no module named PyInput. So what that basically means is this PyInput doesn't exist. So these ones are kind of system, like they're part of the standard library in Python, so they are always there. But PyInput is one that we would need to download from PyPy. The way we do that is with pip. So if I say pip install PyInput, oh, now we're getting another error. This time it says fatal error launcher, unable to correct process using some path to Python, some path to pip, install PyInput. System could not find the file specified. So this means our Python installation is broke. And there's a couple ways we can deal with this, but so I'm going to walk you through about 4 of those ways. So let's go ahead and close that and show you how we can use VS Code to help us with this. So we're going to do a couple things here. First thing I'd recommend is to create a folder. I'm doing this on the desktop. You probably wouldn't do this here, but anywhere you want, I'm going to make a folder for my project. So this will be the auto clicker folder, and I'm going to just move this script into here just to demonstrate how this works. The reason we want to do this is this is just going to make things a lot simpler. So if I open this folder, I'm going to say open with code on the folder, not the file. And the way you know that works is if you have this file menu, it's the top left one over here. They call it Explorer. It's going to show all the files. We should see our autoclicker py, and when we click on that, we should have the file. By putting this in a folder, there's a couple things that we can do that are going to make things easier for us to see what's going on and easier for things to work. So right now we can immediately see that our Python stuff's kind of messed up. So let's go ahead and pick Python 3.10. That's the main version of Python on my system. So we want that to use that. This VS Code makes it really easy to select that, by the way. So if you have multiple versions, that's one of the reasons we're using this. So now if I hit play, we're going to get the same error, module not found error. Everything's the same as before. But now we're inside of a folder. And why we want to do that is because we're going to create what's called a virtual environment. So if we say python-m venv, this is going to say Python, run a module, run the venv module. So we're going to say python-m venv. And what that's going to do is that's going to create a folder called venv. And the reason we're doing this in VS Code is because it's going to make things nice. We only have to set this up once, and then in the future, this will just be working for us. So it's saying, do you want to select it for the workspace folder? And I'm going to say yes. So now we notice this switched to the version in our venv. So it's right here in our venv, which looks great. Everything's happy there. And if we hit play, we still have the same problem. But this time when we fix it, we're going to say pip install py-nput. Oh, not quite. There's one more step. So we're getting the same error. And the reason is this terminal window was opened before that venv was created and before this was set. If we throw this away, we're done with it, and open a new one, Control tilde, we're going to notice that as soon as we pop it open, VS Code is going to automatically run this PowerShell script for us, which is going to activate our venv. And instead of us having to remember that, it'll just do it for us. So that is one of the downsides of virtual environments. You do have to activate them for them to work. But VS Code will make this a lot nicer and easier. So now we're in the venv, and if we now do pip install py-nput, it's going to go and download that and put it right here in our virtual environment. So if we were to look in, so the scripts folder, this is the pip version it's using, and it's guaranteed to match because we made the virtual environment. And if we look in, I believe it's right here, py-nput. So it downloaded it and it installed it right here locally. So everything's contained in this. And that's the reason why we did it in a folder. Makes VS Code happy, but it also keeps this isolated to this project. Now, this is kind of the best practice way to do things with Python as virtual environments, but it doesn't work for every scenario, which we'll talk about in a second. So before we move on, though, let's take a look here. I just ran it. We're no longer getting the error. And if I go ahead and open a browser window, then we can maybe see this in action. So if we pull this up, here's a click tester. And if I click the shortcut to activate it, we can see, yep, indeed, our auto clicker is working. I'm not clicking. It's doing this on its own. And yeah, so that looks good. So what are reasons why you might not want to use a virtual environment? Well, we still have the problem, like if I just open this in my Explorer and I try double clicking this, we're back to the same issue. It pops up and goes away. It doesn't work, right? So that's because our virtual environment has to be activated. So you'd have to open VS Code, which you can do. You could just come in here and say, hey, open code, and then open the auto clicker and hit play, but that might not be what you want. So we're going to look at some other ways to fix this. Before I do that, I'm just going to move this back to the desktop to show. All right, so that's one approach. We could do that with the folder and VS Code. So we're going to show you next how you can troubleshoot this outside of VS Code. We don't always want, our end goal is to be able to just double click this and have it run instead of just fail like it is currently. We now know how to do that with the virtual environment, but there's still something messed up on our system, right? There's things that we should be able to do that we're not able to do. There's a couple things that we need to understand, though, about what's going on with Python and how to troubleshoot this. So we're going to look at this in PowerShell next. So if you hit the Windows key, type in PowerShell, it'll pop open an instance of this. This is kind of the same as what we had in VS Code, but instead of having VS Code helping us with the virtual environment, this is not doing that. Just like when we double click it out here, this is not being helped by VS Code at all. So the first thing I want to do is change directory into the desktop where my script is. So just change folder into wherever you are. So CD for change directory, wherever you want to want to go. And then we're just going to try running it manually. So I'm going to say Python autoclicker .py. And we'll notice that this is the same error we had before. It's still saying, hey, autoclicker py line 5, module not found error, no module name py input. Now, if we try the same thing here without the virtual environment, we're going to get the same error we had in VS Code before we created the virtual environment, right? Because this is not using the virtual environment. So if I say pip, I probably should install py input, it's the same error. It can't, something's broken here, right? There's a couple things that could be going wrong. So let's explore this a little bit. If I go straight into where this is the Python 3.9 folder, which matches what we see here, C Python 3.9, Python exe. Well, immediately I can see there's no Python exe here. That's going to be a problem. If I go into the scripts folder where pip is, actually this is here. So it looks to me like there was an installation of Python at some point and it got uninstalled, but for whatever reason, it left behind some files here. So we have like a broken installation of Python. And there's a couple ways you could fix this. The simplest thing would be to finish cleaning this up. Rather than deleting it, I'm just going to rename it because I think it illustrates a couple of points here. So if we move this to another folder, and we are getting a security warning, and maybe that's why it didn't get cleaned up. But I'm going to go ahead and rename that, and I'm going to try doing this again. And hey, look, that was enough. So by simply cleaning up the old installation, so this Python 3.9, we know we're on Python 3.10, or we want to be on Python 3.10. This old version of pip was trying to call an old version of Python, and that's why it was failing. So by finishing cleaning that up, it took care of that problem. I'm going to go ahead and I guess to confirm, we could now say Python autoclicker.py, and now our autoclicker is once again running. We can test that here again. I'm going to push the shortcut key, and yep, it's working. So that's one thing. If you can finish the cleanup, that would work. But let's imagine we didn't find that easily. How else can we look at this? I'm going to do control break to stop this. You can also just close the window if you don't have a break key, like on a laptop. So let's try a different way. I'm going to, before I do that, I'm going to uninstall PyInput. Pip. We have a working version here. Uninstall PyInput. We want to make sure that we're back to that error that we were getting. No module found, right? Now we're going to put this back, and let's see why simply deleting that or renaming that would work. So the next thing, we tracked down the files. We found a broken installation. It didn't match the one we wanted, so we just got rid of it. That can work. What if you don't feel comfortable with that, or there's some other reason why you can't delete that? Well, here's where we want to move on to the next idea. I'm going to open a new tab just so we have a clean slate. There is a concept in operating systems called the path, and we've been working with a path. Like when we CD desktop, we're changing path to the desktop path, right? So now we're on the desktop. The path is simply a location where on your file system. But there is an environment variable, which just simply means a variable that is available to you when you're in your operating system, when you're logged in, that defines a bunch of locations where various scripts and executables are. One way to look at that is in PowerShell. We can say echo $env:path. And that's going to give us a huge old list. Depending on your system, this could be totally different, but the basic idea is the same. It's going to list a bunch of folders, and it's going to say, hey, go look in those folders. And if you find something that matches a script you type, like when we did pip or Python, it's going to go look inside of these folders for executables and as soon as it finds one, it's going to stop. So the first folder that has something that you type is what it's going to use. And it turns out that Python relies on this quite heavily. And if we have, say, a version of Python, see like right here, we see Python 3.9. It's right here at the very beginning, scripts, there's pip in there, and this is where Python's supposed to be, but we know it's not here. If we have a broken install like this specified at the beginning, then that's going to cause problems. Now, it might be hidden in here somewhere else, so I'll show you a little trick. Because we're in PowerShell, we have a scripting environment here, and we can say split on the semicolons, and that's going to break them up into their own lines, which will make it a little easier to find it. Like in this case, they were right here at the beginning, but if they were somewhere else, it might be harder to find. Splitting on the semicolon will allow us to see what this is. And this is just echoing it out for us. This doesn't change anything or do anything. It just lets us see what it is. So now that we've identified what the problem is, these Python 3.9 ones, we could delete that. This is why deleting this worked, right? So I'm going to show you one more thing, and I'm going to use a command prompt just because the where command shows us a little better, and it's not available in PowerShell. But if I say where pip, it's going to say, hey, I found 3 versions of pip, actually. So we found Python 3.9 pip, which is the broken one. There's a 3.10, and there's a 3.12, apparently. So we have 3 versions of pip. If we come back and look at the path, it makes sense because here's Python 3.9 script. That's the first one. So that's the one that will be used. Remember, the first one it finds is the one it's going to use. So it found this on the path. There's a pip.exe right there. So that's why that is the one at the top of the list. This is the one that runs when we say pip. It's the first match on our path. So if we keep going through this, we'll notice somewhere down here, here's Python 3.10 scripts, and then here's Python 3.12 scripts. And that's why they're in this order, because of the path. So on Windows, in order to fix this, if you hit the Start menu and you type in Edit System Environment Variables, or just Environment or something like that, we're going to find a window like this, System Properties, and we click on Environment Variables. This has 2 main areas. There's a user section and a system section. And we're going to need to look at both. And what we're looking for is this path variable. So this is a list of all the environment variables for the user. Here's the path variable for the user. And if we double click that, it's going to show us the path. And if I'm going to expand this a little bit. So looking through this, we see, we don't see the Python 3.9 in here. The first Python thing is this 3.10 scripts, 3.10, 3.12 scripts, 3.12. There's also another random 3.9 way down here, but that's not the one that's causing the problems because, again, it goes in order of what it finds. So based off this, the user path, it's going to look for Python 3.10 and then Python 3.12. Now, if we compare that to what we see over here, we'll notice that this is the first entry on the user path. And what that means is everything from here, this is the user specified path, and the rest of this is the system path. And our problem is up here, so we know this is on the system path. Now, in order to fix this, it does require administrator permissions. You can't change these without being an admin. But if we scroll down here, we're going to see a path here as well. And if I click edit on this, here are the offending entries on the system path. I am an admin, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete those both because it is a broken install. So just like deleting the files, moving the files made it so it didn't find them anymore because they weren't in a folder specified by the path, right? When we renamed this to just temp, it was no longer on the path. So we could do that. I'm going to cancel that. Or we could fix the path. We don't want to look there anymore. That's an old install. It's broken. It's just junk. It's causing problems. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, hit OK, hit OK. And if we come back here, there's one last thing we have to be aware of. If I run this again, I'm going to do it with the split so we can see they're still here. And the reason for that is we open this PowerShell, when we open a PowerShell window, it will load the path when it's first loaded. So if I make a new PowerShell window and I run that same command, now this one is updated and no longer has that. So you have to make sure you start a new session in order for this to work. Other parts in the operating system might be harder to restart than just clicking a new tab like this is, or opening a new window. So one thing you may need to do when changing the path is just restart, just to make sure everything's up to date and that everything's happy. Because if it doesn't restart, it'll be just like this PowerShell window that was started before the path was changed. It still has those old values. I just ran this again. It still thinks this is the path because that was the path when I started this program. So just something to be in mind, keep in mind there. Now that we've updated the path, if we look at this one more time, this has the same problem. So this is why restarting might be recommended. You have to keep track of everything and when it was opened, or you could just restart your computer. I'm going to say where pip, since this one is after the change, it no longer finds that, right? So this is still here. It's where it used to be. Rather than deleting it or renaming it to something that's not going to be found on the path, we just simply fix the path. Don't look there anymore is what we're essentially saying. So with that change in place, I'm going to start fully fresh. So we just have this brand new window right here that we just created. I'm going to echo the path just to make sure everything's good. Okay, no 3.9. We're going to cd to the desktop. We have to be in the same folder. And we're going to say python-mvn. No. What am I doing? Python autoclicker.py, not the folder. And we're back to our original error. But this time, when I say pip install py-input, it's going to work because this now found the Python 3.10 version that we wanted it to. And now if I say python autoclicker.py, everything is happy again. We can see that here on our test page. Activate it with the script and we're good to go. Now the final test of this would be to try the double clicking from the desktop. So we want that was kind of the initial goal here, what started this whole nonsense. So I'm just going to get these out of the way here for a second. Actually, I want to close this. So you can just close this tab to make sure it's closed. So I don't want any false positives. Everything's closed now. I'm going to double click and it's the same error. Okay, so we fixed the path. It worked in PowerShell, but it's not working even after a reboot. So what could be the problem now? So if I say Python, I guess I need to cd desktop first, Python autoclicker, everything's great. Well, it turns out, if you remember, when we were looking at things, we saw a reference to another version of Python. So let's switch over to a command prompt just again, because it's easier. So I'm going to say, where's Python this time? And if we look at this, there's Python 3.10, Python 3.12, and then this Windows Apps Python thing. Don't know what that is, but what could be happening is 3.12 is later than 3.10. This might have been installed later, and then the path might have been changed by something else or someone else, where part of the system is using this, but maybe whatever's registered for, like when I double click, is the 3.12 version, right? So I could say choose another app and then look for an app on the PC, and then I could go looking. We want basically this folder. Well, we want the 3.10 one actually. So I'm going to come over here, paste that, look at 3.10, and I want Python exe. So I could do this. This is one way to fix that. This is the file association issue. So I could say, okay, and now that's good. So if I close this all out, Sure. And I double click this. It still is not working. So I think the default one is still this. So this one is probably 312. This is just a guess. But here's the 310 one. So now that I've associated this with this, I can say 310 and it pops up and stays up. Now that we know that bit of information that, hey, there actually are more versions installed, we know that the version that will be used is 310, but when we double click, we have a hunch that it's 312. That's the default. So the file association is the thing. We could say choose another app, and then we could say always use this, and then select Python 310. And now that's going to work. So that's another way you could do this, the default file association. So this is saying for any time I click on a .py, use 310. But let's say that we don't actually want to do that. So let's switch that back. So I'm going to say choose another app. We're going to say always and switch it back to what we think is the 312. So I go ahead and launch that, and it's failing. So how else could we fix this? If I open PowerShell again, we need a way to get that other version of Python, right? So if I say, I'm actually going to do this in command because, again, the where is much easier. Where's Python shows us all of these. So here's the problem. It's 310, 312, and then this Windows app one. We're trying to get 312 to load because when I do pip install, it's the same thing with where pip, hopefully. Yep, it is. So 310 is the version it's going to use. We want to basically switch this. So if we remember what we just did with the path, we can edit the system variables. So in the start menu, go edit system variables, go to the environment variables, and if we edit the user path, we can see here's the Python 310 and here's the 312 entries. If we simply move these up, so we've got 312 scripts, 312, 310 scripts, 310. Push OK, 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 and remembering we have to start a new window. So now if I say where Python, now 312 is the default and 310 is next. So I'm going to start a new window just so everything's clean. CD desktop, we're going to simulate this. I'm going to say Python autoclicker.py, and we're back to this error. But this time, the Python version is 3.12. So the path variable is super important. And to fix it, we can just pip install py-input, keeping in mind where pip, it's now using 312 because we fixed that environment variable. So the environment variables are super, super important. We need this installed with whatever version of Python's trying to launch this. And we've seen a bunch of ways to troubleshoot this. Helps us understand a little bit more about how Python is working on Windows. And now the final test, if we double click this, indeed it does work now. It's using Python 3.12. It's up and running. If I switch to my browser, I can pull up that click test, push the button, and my auto clicker is indeed working. So hopefully this helps. This is a lot more in depth than most of the tutorials that I like to do, but there are a lot of things that can go wrong and you really kind of need to understand all these different ways, or maybe you found the way that worked for you real quick and were able to just do it right off the bat. But in any case, if you have any questions, let me know, and hopefully this gets you up and running with Python on Windows.